Welcome to What's Cooking. I'm Tim Paroli. Today we're going to show you how to make some very easy to prepare cream pies. We're going to begin with a very basic recipe. However, we're going to overstep that boundary on the program, and we're going to show you how you can prepare some cream pies, like a banana cream pie we'll demonstrate today, and also a coconut cream pie, two of my favorites. The other variations are chocolate and just a vanilla custard pie. But we're going to review a couple of important steps in making a pie, and the first thing is, and probably the most important or as important as the filling, and that is the crust of the pie. Now, I don't have a graphic to show you on a pie crust because we've shown you several in the past. However, the one I'm going to give you right now is very, very simple to do. And this would make, the amounts that I will give you right now will make one double pie crust. In other words, a double pie crust is one that is either two untopped pies or one double top pie, such as an apple that has the crust on the top. You need a double crust for that. So I'm giving you the recipe for one double crust. And the pies that I'm going to make today, we're going to cover with a meringue. So they're going to be a little bit different, and we're not going to use that pie crust on the top of them. The filling that we're going to use is a meringue pudding filling that the graphic is up for you right now. And the ingredients for that is flour, some milk, sugar, butter, and a pinch of salt, and I'll go over those measurements as I make that for you. And the method will be that we're going to cook this much like a pudding. However, for the egg yolks, we're going to keep the whites to one side. We're going to use that to make the top. And we're going to, for step 3, we're going to mix some of the hot mixture with the egg yolks, and that's going to be tempering, and I'm going to explain that as I do it. And then we're going to just cook that for a few more minutes until it's thick. But you have to stir that constantly because of the flour in it. So that's our basic steps for the filling. So our pie crust, which is the first thing that we need, we're going to begin with 2 cups of flour. And I'm just going to put the flour into the bowl, and I'm going to use a cup of shortening. Now, some people swear that lard makes the best pie crust, or whatever you'd like. It can be any kind of shortening. If you're going to use butter instead of the shortening, leave out the salt. And I have just this little bit of salt right here. Somebody calling to tell me about the lard. And I'm going to use a nice pinch of salt, and that's about how much, when I tell you it's a pinch of something that I use. It's just enough so that you can see it on my hand there, and that's all that goes into that pie crust. And then we're going to cut this together, or just mix it together, and I'm going to add about 1/4 cup of cold water. Now, I have water that I had ice in, and it's all melted, so the water is still nice and cold. So what I'm going to do with this is just push this around, and I'm going to press the flour into the shortening. You can see that lump of shortening there, and I'm just going to press that around. You can use a pastry cutter for this, or 2 forks if you'd like. However, you're going to handle the pie crust anyway, and it's very simple to just use your hand when you're mixing it, and just keep the 2 of them, mix them together. And the object here is to break up the shortening till we get it in very small lumps. And the smaller they are, the mealier the crust is going to be, and we're after a very, very tender pie crust. Now, pie crust and biscuits are very similar in that when we're making the 2 of them, what we do is we follow what's called a pastry method, and that's when we take flour and add the shortening just like this, and you can see how it's broken up very, very small right now. Once we have it mixed to this point, we're going to add some of the water to that. I'm going to move a boiling pot off the stove here that we're going to use a little later on. Now, once you have your pie crust looking like this, you stop mixing it, and we're going to add just a little bit of the water to that. Now, if it's a very humid day, you would use a lot less of the water because the pie crust will already feel very much the way it will after the water's added, so you only add a little bit to that. And then our biggest mistake when we're making a pie dough or a biscuit dough is that we overmix it. So I'm going to just push that around. I can feel that water there. It's almost enough to hold it together. It's still just a little bit loose. This is nice and dry. So I add a little bit more of the water, and that's going to do it. I'm just pushing this around. I'm not trying to mix this real hard or knead it. And then you'll have it so that it begins to stick to itself again, and it will stick to your hand much like it did before you added the water when it was mostly just a shortening. Once you have it like this, stop. And it looks like it's not mixed. And that's why most of us continue mixing and mixing, and we end up ruining a perfectly good pie crust. So the pie crust should look like it's not done, not mixed all the way. When you have it so that it doesn't look like it's all the way, you've probably got it just right. And then you just take out the amount that you need. And I'm just going to squeeze that together and get that into a ball, half of it. And we just flatten that out a little bit. And that goes onto a floured surface. Get the rest of this off my hand so I can work. And then we're going to sprinkle some flour on top of that. And it's soft enough, you can usually press a lot of it out to get it ready. And all you want to remember now is that we don't want to overhandle this, so we're going to work from the middle and out. So with the pin, we push from the middle and out, and we go in all directions because we're trying to get this nice and round. You don't want to roll this back and forth because you're going to end up making that pie crust really tough. So we're trying to move this pie crust in one direction only. So we move it all the way across till we get it the size that we're looking for. And we know by the measurements that half of that's going to make it. I'm going to clean my hands off over the bowl. And we're going to pick up that crust. I'm going to slide a spatula under it to make sure it's not stuck. I'll just fold that right in half. And then I take one of our pie pans and put it on the working surface, pull the halfway over, and we unfold it just like that. Now, if you've torn it at this point, don't worry about it. Just take a little piece and patch it. It'll be fine. Now, the couple important steps now is to make sure that we press this pie shell all the way into the bottom of the pie pan. We want to make sure that we're into the corner of that pan. That's one big problem with the crust shrinking and with it puffing up and bubbling up when we bake these, because this is going to be a baked shell that we're going to use. Then we can press with our hands on the outside, and that's going to just cut that right off even with the rest of the pan. Pick up those pieces before we handle them anymore. And then we're going to just move that, and we just flute the edge of that. And we're going to just make the edge on that, trim that right up, and now we have our pie crust all ready to go. All we have to get ready for is the filling. So we put that together. The only other thing that we want to do now is to prick the pie dough all the way around and around the bottom to let any air escape. And we're all set, and that goes into a nice hot oven. Do that twice, you have 2 of them. So that goes into our oven to brown up. Now while that's cooking, I'm going to move this out of the way, and I'm going to put a tray up here that has everything on it that I need to make the filling. And the filling is very easy to make. You want to make sure that you have a nice, thick, heavy pot, one that you make sauce in, that you're not going to burn or scald anything in, like the milk that we're going to use today. And we're going to put the milk into the pot. These are 2 cups of milk. We put all the milk in there, and we're going to let that get nice and hot. We're going to add the sugar to that right now. We're going to throw the other milk in there, and I'm going to stir that around. And we're going to let that begin to warm up. Now I've got that sugar all stirred in there, so now I want to add the flour. This would be a good time if I could show you the graphic on this one more time, that filling that we're doing. We stir all the flour in there, mix that all around, get all the lumps out of it. Once I have all of them out of it and mixed nice and smooth, I add the butter to it. And then all I have left to add is the egg yolks. So I begin cooking this, and remember it has that thickener in it. It has the flour added to it, which is going to thicken up the milk. It has the sugar, which is going to take care of the flavor and the sweetness. And we have the butter, which is going to make it very rich. The only other thing left is the egg yolks. And the egg yolks, aside from, they're going to thicken this also, they're going to enrich this pudding mix. So we stir this around and get it nice and hot. You can see the butter's melting up really good. I'm going to beat those egg yolks up a little bit so that we're all set to add them. And depending upon the size of the batch that we're making will regulate your cooking time. This is enough for 2 pies, and it will usually take from 3 to 4 minutes to cook. And I want to make sure that we have that all stirred around. You can see the butter has melted all the way through already, so we know the temperature is getting nice and hot. And we're going to take the yolks now and break them up so that I have them all ready to go. Now I wait for this to come up to the boil. And I give that another stir, make sure that the bottom is okay and that we're keeping all of our ingredients mixed together nice and smooth. And if you look right now, it's very clear as far as the color. It has just the color of the milk, and it doesn't have any other color to it. So when we add the egg to it, it's going to pick up a nice yellow color. And that's what we're looking for. We want a nice, rich color to our pudding. And I'm going to take a peek at the pie shell right now and see how that's doing. Already the crust is already puffing up. The next thing for that to do is to brown. And I like to take a look at them at the beginning when they're cooking. And if you have a glass door, it's very nice. You can peek right in at them while they're cooking like I can. And you can see that it's not going to bubble up. We're not going to have any humps in the middle. So we know that it's been pressed into the corner of the pie pan, and that's working. And we know that all the little holes in the bottom are ventilating our pie crust just the way we want it. So we have to let this come up to the boil, and then we're going to temper our eggs into it, cook it for a couple more minutes, and then we're going to add our different fillings and toppings to our pudding. So I've got a couple more minutes to stir and cook this. While I'm stirring and cooking away here, I'd like you to watch this.
I want to register with Selective Service. Yeah. Fill out the card.
Welcome back. We're checking our pie crust, which is browning really nice and it's all bubbled up. So that's an indication to me that it's ready to be filled. So that comes over to the table. And with it, now I have to decide which one I'm going to make. And I have opted for the coconut cream because for the end of the program, I already have a banana cream pie made, so I can show you one of each. For the amount that you want to put into the center of the pie, the amounts can be up to you. However, whatever amount you decide, always reserve a little bit for the top. So I'm going to put some of the coconut in there, and that's going to be about a whole cup of sweetened coconut. And remember that if you're going to be making a pie like this one and you're not really fond of very sweet fillings, when you're making the coconut, you're going to want to leave out half of the sugar because the coconut makes the filling even sweeter, which for me is just fine. So I'm going to take that coconut, and there's our filling, which had the eggs added to it. And this one, as it came up to the boil, got very, very thick. So I only had to cook it for about a minute, and I'm all set. So we stir in our coconut into that hot filling, and we just mix that around. And then we just take our filling now, and that goes into the hot shell. Now the amounts that we have made and have given you for these, we'll make 2. So I put this into the pie shell and I look around at it, and I like them a little thicker than that, a little deeper with the filling. So I'm going to put just a little bit more of the filling there, and then I'm just going to mix that all around. So we have that all ready. Now while I'm doing this, I'm going to turn a mixer on that has the egg whites from the eggs that we used in here, and I'm just going to beat them, and we're going to make a meringue out of that. So I have them, and you'll hear the mixer going on, and that'll take those egg whites and just mix them right up. And I'm going to take our filling now and put that to one side. And while I have the meringue, which is going to mix for a couple of minutes, while the pie cools down just a little bit, I'm going to put that back over by the stove. The soup that we're going to serve is going to be a dumpling soup. The majority of the soup is going to be dumplings in a chicken broth. So I'd like to show you the ingredients and the method for the dumplings while we're listening to the mixer beat away. The ingredients are very simple. We have some stock, and it could be a beef stock, although today I'm using some chicken stock, and that is the basis for the soup. The rest of it is the dumpling. We're going to take baking powder, eggs, oil, some flour, salt, milk, and a little bit of parsley, and we're going to mix up some dumplings. Once we have them mixed, we're going to drop them into the hot stock and cook them till they puff up. So while we're making a pie, which is, I know, going to be the favorite today, I also want to have something that's going to be nutritious to serve with it, and that's going to be our dumpling soup. So I have a small amount of the soup. I usually judge by the amount of eggs how many dumplings I'm going to be making. So we can see the egg whites are up. I'm going to just slow that down for a second, and I'm going to add some sugar to that to make that a meringue. All I do is mix that and let that mix and just add that gradually. You're probably looking at this saying, gee, how come the egg whites are up so nice? The only secret to making egg whites whip up nice and white and stiff like that is that the bowl be absolutely clean, and that you don't have any grease in the bowl or on the attachment, and that you don't have any egg yolks in with the whites. One other thing that makes them whip a lot easier is if the egg whites are at room temperature. They'll whip right up and you'll be all set to go. All right, so that's ready. You can see that meringue only takes a moment or two. I take some of the extra coconut. That goes on the top of that pie. Just spread that right around. And that could be baked just like that, and that would be a plain coconut cream pie. And you might say, well, gee, that's great just the way it is. You got to try them with the meringue on them. So we take that meringue out, and we just dollop that right on there, half of this, or all of it if you're going to make one pie a meringue pie and another pie that's not. You see, the meringue is very easy, and this recipe is set up so that you're going to use the egg whites. You're not going to use the egg whites. You're going to use just the egg yolks, so we have the egg whites left over. And this is one recipe that uses both parts of the egg. Even though they're in two separate things on the same food item, we're using them in a completely different way. We're using one to enrichen, and the other one is used to decorate the top, which is the meringue. And all it really does is it's just a nice decorative way to hold up all that sugar on the top. So there's our meringue. And now I'm going to open the oven door and put that into the oven, which is still running nice and hot because of from baking the pie. And all we have to do with this pie now is wait for the tips of the meringue to brown. And once they brown, that pie is ready. And I'm not worried about the meringue falling because it's nice and stiff going in there, and the oven is very hot. By the time that browns, or as fast as it browns, it's not going to get a chance to melt the egg whites and let them fall. So I'm going to get our dumplings ready, and I'm going to keep an eye on the pie. You let me know if it gets too brown. We beat that egg. We're going to add a little oil to the dumpling mix, and the reason for that is the extra oil is going to make these dumplings much smoother and richer. I'm going to put a little bit of white pepper in there. I'm going to put some salt in here. I'm going to put a little bit of baking powder. That's going to make our dumplings puff up real nice. We're going to, a little bit of the salt there, and I'm going to add some parsley. Now I'm using dehydrated parsley, so I want to add that now and get that wet so it'll mix right in there. And then I'm going to add the milk to that. And this is going to be about 1/4 cup of milk to an egg. And I mix that up. And then all I want to do now is add flour till I get this the consistency of dumpling dough. And now you're saying he's being wise telling me to make it the consistency of dumpling dough. Dumpling dough and biscuits are very similar. The appearance of the dumpling dough will be just a little bit thinner than your pie dough was. So we add that, mix that around. Right now that's a little too thin, so we put a little more flour in it. And we just mix that right around. And you can see that the dumplings are going to be predominantly yellow from the egg. It's going to have the body from the flour and the green, so we have a nice contrast of colors, and it's also going to be a very nice contrast in flavors. So I have it, they're about so that they'll drop. I want that just a little bit, heavier. We like our dumplings light, but they also have to meet the requirement to be a bit substantial. We can't have them so that they're all very, very puffy and light, so that the minute they hit the soup, or we try to ladle them out of the soup, that they fly apart. So we have that mixed, and our dumpling mix is ready to go. Now we'll test the thickness of this by putting a small amount into our boiling stock. Now, a Pennsylvania Dutch favorite is chicken and dumplings, so the only thing that we need to make this a classic dish like that, an American favorite, would be to boil the chicken. To keep the chicken that we have made the stock from, pull all the meat off the bones, and I think it would be nice with nice big chunks of carrot, celery, and onion floating around in there, and then we add our dumplings. And we make them the size of the tablespoon, and they should pop right back up to the surface once we drop them in there. And one egg makes quite a few good-sized dumplings. So if you were going to make up to a couple of gallons of soup, you would use only 4 to 6 eggs. So the egg goes quite far, because don't forget we're adding the milk to that. So we just put them right in. You can see how quickly they float. The reason that they're floating is because the stock is boiling, and that's cooking those dumplings immediately. And these dumplings are going to be tender. So we want to be careful that we don't beat them around with a spoon or smash them with a ladle. We want to treat them very delicately now. We have one more to put in there. And I think this makes quite a nice difference from the ordinary fare of maybe chicken and noodle or chicken and rice. I get tired of the same thing time after time when I'm looking for something other than maybe a macaroni product. This is a different way that we can add a starch to our soups. And we can take something as plain as a nice hot chicken broth if we're not feeling well, or if that's all that we have on hand, and we can really enhance the appearance and make it a meal by adding dumplings to it. And they don't require a whole lot of time. By the time they boil and come up to the top, after a minute or two, they're done. So I want to take out our soup bowl. And I'm not forgetting to pull out a pie pan. We're going to dish some of the dumplings up. And once that comes to a good boil again, I can shut that off, because I don't want it to boil too hard, because if it gets into a good rolling boil and the dumplings are as tender as they're supposed to be, that will be able to tear the dumplings apart. So we usually a couple of dumplings and then the rest of the chicken broth right in there. And it usually doesn't require any kind of garnish, because, as I said before, we have that nice contrast of colors and appearances and textures there. Now our pie is browned up already, and that only takes a couple of minutes, because, as I said, the oven that we're using is the same temperature that we did the pie crust in, and that is very hot, or 400 degrees. So that will usually brown right up, and it will stay nice and high. So there's our pie. And there is one thing that you want to remember when you're making these kind of pies, that after you have been enjoying them for a while, you can get very particular. I know a few people that once the pie has been made and it's cooled down is when they like them the best. However, if you take one of these pies and refrigerate them, they're going to have the tendency for the meringue to weep or to run just a little bit on the filling. So there'll be a thin layer of the liquid sugar and moisture there. And many people don't like the pie after it begins to run. So I'm going to cut this pie, which is the cool one. I have to get a knife right here. And we're going to cut this one, which I said was the same filling, but this one is going to have the banana in it. And you can see that the meringue is nice and soft. It's nice and brown, and we just cut a nice sized chunk of that. And I always like to have the plate very close, because if you made your pie crust the way I've shown you and you haven't handled it a lot, that pie crust is going to be very, very flaky, and it's going to break very easy. And that is a good example of how the pie should be. Now, this pie was baked only about a half hour before we went on the air, and it was just enough to cool it down, and it hasn't been put into the refrigerator yet, and I think that's the best time to enjoy one of these. Well, it's kind of miserable out today. I've got some nice hot dumpling soup and a big slice of this pie that I'm going to enjoy. So when they ask you what's cooking, surprise them with some cream pies and dumpling soup. Thank you for watching.